Hi, everyone. This is Daniel Fulco, Agnita M. Stine Schreiber Curator at the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts in Hagerstown, Maryland. It's my pleasure to welcome you back to a new edition of the Curator's Den, in which we're going to be looking at some Near Eastern art from the collection, and then also branching off a little bit towards the end and talking about some Islamic art. This is a two-part series, so today I'm reaching back further into the earlier parts of Near Eastern art from the collection, and next time we'll come up and date to more modern times. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen with you, and we will launch into today's presentation. Before I begin, I would just like to make an acknowledgement to our sponsors that this program is sponsored by Dean and Ashley Nota Bartolo through Washington County Gives, which was held several months ago as a fundraiser. So thank you very much for your support of this program. Here is a presentation slide just showing you some of the Near Eastern and Islamic art that we have in the collection. And this just gives you a preview of the kinds of things I'm going to be exploring in this two-part series. Next time, we're actually going to get to the paintings that you see here, but today we'll end with this box. So I hope that you enjoy the discussion. Our history of and heritage of presenting the arts of the Near East goes all the way back in the museum's history to the founding by Anna and William Singer, who are shown up here in this photo. While their focus was not on Islamic art or Near Eastern art per se, they did take an interest in it. And you can see that by a couple of images that I've included in this slide. They began to take an interest in it around the time that this gentleman here, pictured, Richard Medford, was the director of the museum. He was the second director, beginning in 1933. And here's a photo of one of the Singer's homes. And I believe this may have been Dalheim in the Netherlands. And you could see how eclectic the interior is. It's filled with all different kinds of objects from around the world. Anything from European paintings to tapestries, Buddhist sculptures, and then also notice the Persian carpets, some of them actually quite large, that are displayed here in their very large living room. So this sort of speaks to the worldly vision of our founders, who very much had a passion for the art of different cultures, those of Asia, but also within their collections, other parts of the world, including ancient Egypt. You may remember this sculpture. I included it in my Curator's Den Part 1 on Egyptian art from our collection. It was actually the Singers who laid the cornerstone of that with this donation of this statuette in 1949. And it was very likely displayed in one of their homes, as I was saying, in the Netherlands, potentially also in Norway, where they also lived. But in terms of Islamic art, they did have a few pieces in their collection. One which is an abstracted peacock vase, which has this blue glaze on a tannish brown ground. This work, if you come to the museum, is on view. And it's actually quite nice, even though it is more simple in terms of its design and it being more of a utilitarian object. It's actually quite nicely made. And it has a series of these peacocks that go all the way around the circumference of the object. This piece that you're looking at up here comes from the West Norway Museum of Decorative Arts, which is part of the Code Museums in Bergen, which was the closest city to the village of Olden in which the Singers lived. And in this photograph, that's where they're actually sitting. This is a Safavid era dish that they had in their collection, an example of lusterware from 13th century Seljuk, Iran. And I don't have a color photograph of it, but if you could try to imagine that the colors are probably copper and a tan or white ground, and it has these various abstracted figures and other patterns that are on here, imported from actually Mongolian and Chinese art. So the Singers' tastes were really quite eclectic. And this played a role in terms of how the museum conceived of its programming in its early years. In terms of artists who were fascinated by the Near East and points further away than that, further afield, We have some artists in the collection, such as Marius Alexander Jacques Bauer, who was Dutch. And this painting called Palitana, which is in India, was on view in the museum's lobby last summer. The singers collected Bauer's work and donated several pieces to the museum. I have 3 examples here with the Palitana watercolor, which is really quite outstanding. And over here, a painting called Mosque in Moonlight. And then on the right, a wonderful watercolor on paper called Bazaar, likely also from this time period when the artist was working abroad in the Near East, the 1890s. And it's a very spontaneous drawing, almost in the manner of Eugène Delacroix, if you're familiar with some of his North African works, from the time that he spent there and was working when he came back to France. So this just sort of gives you a little bit of context in terms of the singer's interest in Near Eastern and Islamic cultures. Though not the focus, they were more passionate about Far Eastern art, particularly Chinese and Mongolian and Tibetan, but they did have an interest in it. And another one of the, artists whom they liked very much was a man named Sarkis Khachaturian. And the painting is called The Song of the Bride from 1925 to 27 in the collection of our sister museum, Singer Lauren. And it's sort of a romantic, fanciful portrait of this lady who's being entertained by these musicians and these women who look like either attendants or dancers who are sitting in the background. And I bring in Khachaturian because he created a series of works that were actually exhibited in our museum here in Hagerstown as part of a larger exhibition of Persian art. There are just 2 slides showing you that the lusterware dish from about 1200 in Bergen, and then the Iranian storage jar or vase with the peacock and floral design, likely from the Safavid period, 17th to 18th century Iran, or Persia as it used to be known, just to give you the detail on those 2. Here's an example of one of the carpets that the singers gave us and that we still have in the collection. Iranian, very likely 19th century. We have several others, this one being a runner. And again, it was likely in Dalheim or one of their other homes. So these Islamic arts and the interest that the singers had in them do carry over and are manifested in a loan exhibition that we received in 1933, only for several weeks, as you can see there, which must have been quite a feat to put it up and to take it down, leading up to May 4th and then coming down on May 30th, only about 3 and some odd weeks. But still, it was here. And it was very interesting. It included actually reproductions of fresco paintings. It included rugs, not unlike the example I was showing you, the singers donated. Pottery of the 6th to 16th centuries, miniature paintings, and photographs of Persian and Islamic architecture. Many of these objects came from the collection of Dikran Kalikian and also various New York galleries. And I mentioned before Sarkis Khachaturian with that fanciful painting. Well, here are 2 examples of those frescoes that he recreated on canvas. According to the catalog that we have, the exhibition as a whole was organized by the American Institute for Persian Art and Archaeology, which is no longer in existence. But at that time, in 1932, when the show was traveling around the country, it even appeared very interestingly and kind of strangely at the Museum of Modern Art, which was brand new at that time. So we can see how much things have changed over the course of almost 90 years. And what Khachaturian did was he reconstructed a series of 17th century fresco paintings that were, I believe, in the Ali Kapu Palace, either Ali Kapu or Golistan Palace. And they were recreated as in order to show visitors what they might have looked like, because to this day they don't survive. So they're from Safavid, Iran. And these paintings must have really made quite an impact because their size was actually quite large. This here, 42.5 by 20.25, so a pretty good size. And then 31.5 by 29. This one being from the Ali Kapu in Isfahan. And Unfortunately, I don't have color images of these. I don't know what became of them. I would have to do some more research, but I found it really quite intriguing that these were here. And it's such an early date in the museum's history. So I just thought I would share that. And these were really quite beautiful. They were courtly scenes meant to embellish the Iranian Shah's royal residence. And another reason to keep these in mind is towards the end of the presentation today, I'll be showing you a box that depicts courtly activities from Qajar era Iran. And by Qajar, I mean it's a dynasty of Iran that emerges in the late 17th century after the fall of the Safavid dynasty and continues all the way until the 1920s. So this exhibition sort of sets the stage for us to host some future displays and exhibits of Islamic and Near Eastern art, even leading today, and I will reference it at times, to our very nice and special exhibition known as Allure of the Near East, Treasures from the Huntington Museum of Art, which is on view at the museum through the end of August. So I encourage you to come and see that. It's a rare opportunity to see Islamic art from the Tuma collection at the Huntington Museum of Art in West Virginia at our own museum. But today I'm going to be looking at a series of antiquities that arrived at the museum with a group of Egyptian objects as well in 1958. And here I have a couple of archival documents, which you may recognize from a previous curator's den, a collection of what were then termed 24 Mediterranean cultural objects listed in the annual report. And then also in our monthly brochure or bulletin, a recent accession, and it provides a description there, including Egyptian objects. So some of you may remember those from my last video. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, I encourage you to look at that two-part series. And what this group of 24 Mediterranean objects had in it were several Sumerian pieces. Now, when I'm talking about Sumer, I'm talking about the region called Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, as it's also known. And this is a really old civilization. It's a fascinating one. And it's part of the ancient Near East. Between 4000 and 3000 BCE, there were a series of major cultural shifts that took place in this region, whereby agricultural villages gradually evolved into cities. That you can see here, they became actually these city-states: Uruk, Umma, Lagash, Ur, and this was part of a general region called Sumer. And what happened was you had the creation of these independent cities, overseen by their own nobilities, rulers, and political officials. They evolved into sophisticated societies, and they had large architectural complexes for worship, ritual, and administration. With those changes, you needed to be able to document a great deal of information. And this is perhaps what the ancient Sumerians are most famous for today, is developing one of the world's earliest writing systems. The Sumerians are believed to have invented the wagon wheel and plow. However, one of their greatest achievements was the establishment of something known as cuneiform, a series of wedge-shaped symbols pressed into clay tablets with a stylus or sharp writing instrument. And that's what we're going to look at. I had mentioned before that they were also renowned for large-scale architecture, such as ziggurats, these stepped buildings that were used for religious purposes, and also in this very flat plain, which once was not so arid, but actually was more fertile before climate change, it would flood. So these buildings had to be elevated in order to protect them from being inundated. So the Sumerians used their writing system and inscriptions, which do appear on these buildings, to document the construction and also administrative practices. I had mentioned cuneiform. It goes through a series of changes and evolution, from pictographs as early as 3100 BCE all the way to a later cuneiform sign that we're going to see examples of today in 700 BC. They basically become more abstracted over time. And to give you an example of how this worked, you would have a cylindrical seal, such as the one that you see here in the Penn University of Pennsylvania, otherwise known as Penn Archaeological Museum, a fabulous repository of objects, by the way. It would be used to press an image onto a clay tablet. And what was really interesting about this is they were able to reuse them. And this was very important because the writer would initially etch the wet tablet with a stylus, as I mentioned before, made of a reed, and then they would typically leave them out to dry. And then once the author decided that they may want to change the information or reuse the object, what they would do is rehydrate the tablet and recycle it into a blank state. The seal itself is used to impress the image or information onto it. Important documents that were created for more permanent purposes would actually be fired in a kiln to give them permanence, such as this over here that you see with the lapis lazuli, which actually would have been carved. But some of the ceramic ones, if they were more permanent, would have been fired. So you had two different kinds. Here's an example of one of those archaic tablets. The drilled holes in this example denote a number, and the pictographs represent animals in this example for a transaction of goat and sheep in the Yale Babylonian collection. Another one from the city of Umma from around 2050 BCE indicates that 3 workers are paid for 3 bundles a day. The total for 6 days is 54 bundles of reed. So they're used to document transactions and activities in agricultural, the agricultural sector of their economy and society. And this one here denotes the documenting of sheep, in this case 198 of them, and then also goats, this being a matter of livestock and other animals, an important part of the early agricultural society that they were. Here we come to the example in our collection, which is very likely Sumerian, dates from probably 3000 to 2000 BCE. It is ceramic, and it was part of the group that we purchased in 1958. At some point, I hope to get it out on view here at the museum in our Fulton gallery, as it would be nice to show it. It is very likely the oldest object in our collection. And it's really small. It's only about this big. And this shows you the side view of it. These works were really very important for, as I had mentioned, the purposes of writing, but also keeping track of information. In the time of the Sumerians in ancient Mesopotamia, they were developing systems and systematized processes of a central government. And a very important way to keep track of this was on small tablets like this. They did have larger tablets too. For example, ones that are really more like the size of a table or even bigger, used to record epics, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh being one of the most famous. Here is the underside of the piece, and you can see that the writing continues on to the other side. Now, I'm not sure exactly what this says. I would have to send it to a specialist to see if they could decipher it. But I imagine that it records some kind of a transaction dealing with the sale of or keeping of animals, sheep, or also cattle. It could also have to do with the storage of grain or the sale of particular merchandise or goods. That's my guess. But it's certainly administrative in this type of example. The one on the left is from the Spurlock Museum of World Cultures, a museum which I visited as a graduate student at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And you can see that the characters that are inscribed on this one from around the same date are similar to the ones that we have here. You know, zoom in so you can see that. Ours is a bit worn down. It's gotten a little bit battered, but you can make out some of these characters. And they are, in many regards, similar to this example over here in the Spurlock Museum's collection, which is also ceramic. The one on the Spurlock actually describes bedding operations in a canal system. In one case, it records that 46 male workers were employed for bedding the inlet of a small supply canal, which ran along the Isum field, parallel to a main canal, and for digging irrigation ditches in the Isum field itself. So it is possible that ours has to do with field work as well. Engineering, and in this case, irrigation, which was a very important part of Mesopotamian society in terms of creating farms and agriculture. The region was renowned for this. That's why it's called the Fertile Crescent. Another similar example can be found in the collection of the Detroit Institute of Art, quite similar to ours in terms of how it's made, again, really tiny. We also have an example of one of these cylindrical seals, the kind that I had showed you before that would have been rolled onto the tablet to create the image. These type of cylindrical black seals were stylized. They contained very stylized figures. Here you can see actually one man that's standing here. These are probably numerals. It's a stick figure inscription. And typically they had administrative functions. And in some cases, they would be used to identify the owner. You may ask yourself, what's the hole for? Well, the hole was used because in some cases they were attached to a bead or made into a necklace so that the person could wear it or keep it with them if they had to travel somewhere and use the seal again. There are instances of some of these also being used as sort of talismans, but more likely in this case, rather than being an amulet, this one had an administrative purpose. It's likely made of an iron compound called hematite, but it could also, this example, be ceramic. Here's what it looks like when you tip it on its side. In central and southern Mesopotamia, both stamp and cylinder seals appeared together near the end of the 3rd millennium BCE. They were carved in the form of animals or also humans, stick figures, as you can see here. And the sealing surface was decorated with very simple designs. And they comprised of drill holes and these incised lines. It is possible, as I mentioned, though, that many of the stamps were not actually used as seals in certain instances, but were worn in some cases to ward off evil. The example of it in our collection would have been used to, if it were being used as a seal, to create an impression on a clay tablet like the one that I showed you. And in many cases, these clay tablets could be rehydrated if needed, basically rehydrated, erased, and used over. This is an example, though, of a modern impression that's made to show you how the object functioned. The one in the Penn Museum was from the tomb of Queen Pwabi of Ur. And it shows a series of figures, very likely recording an interaction at the Queen's court. More specifically, it's not indicated, but it has a very specific function and purpose in terms of being part of an aristocratic or courtly context here. And you can tell by the use of the precious lapis lazuli, which was imported from Afghanistan in the ancient world, that a royal patron was involved with this object. Here's an example of one that was formerly on the art market, made of hematite, and you can see how it bears very similar resemblance to the example in our collection. And these are really old objects. It's amazing to think that the Sumerians had developed this sophisticated writing system so early in time. We also have in our collection one of the stamp seals, and this one is more likely used as an amulet, whereas the other one is a purely administrative and functional component. The one that we have is either hematite or statite. And here you can see that it has a hole in it, again, that could be attached to a string and worn on one's body. And here's an example that was formerly on the art market from about 3100 to 2900 BCE that is somewhat similar to our example. So those are some of the oldest objects in the collection, and certainly the earliest from the Near Eastern regions. Today, what we'll look at is some glass from the ancient Mediterranean, very likely from what's today Lebanon or Syria. It could have also been made in what's today Israel or Jordan, and see how those served as a basis for some Islamic objects. And before I had mentioned some of those dynasties at the beginning, the Seljuks are this dynasty that rules from about 1040 to 1196. And one of the objects we'll look at is from the Umayyad period, 756 to 1031. And the Eastern Mediterranean and parts of the Middle East, as well as North Africa, are conquered by Muhammad and subsequently his armies, going all the way through the 7th century to 8th century CE. So from the 600s all the way through the 700s are the Islamic conquests. And then when we end today, we will come all the way up. I mentioned the Safavid Empire in Iran before. Those are the dates. And then you also have the Qajars. I don't know if they made it on here, but the Qajars come after the Safavids. And here are some maps that show the spread of Islam between about 750 and 1500. So you can see we're talking about a religion that's spread over a vast geographical area. The red here, though, indicates where some of these glass objects were likely produced. In the exhibition, Allure of the Near East, we have on view some Islamic glass. And for a more detailed discussion of these in particular, I refer you to the video that I did with Sarah Hall, our director, about Let's Talk Art. And these examples here are Islamic, and they take inspiration from Roman examples, specifically unguentaria, as well as sprinkler bottles that you see. And in terms of their coloring, the way that they're hand blown, the Islamic objects draw upon them very closely. By the 1st century CE, the technique of glass blowing revolutionized the art of glassmaking in the Roman Empire. This is a tradition that would be handed down to Iranian glassmakers as well as Syrian glassmakers in the Islamic world, who sort of rework them and reinterpret their forms, adding color and creating really interesting designs. Notice the rings that are around the top of this example here. They actually emulate the design that you see on this Roman sprinkler bottle that's in our collection. And at the moment, it's on view in the Grow Gallery corridor if you visit the museum. In this particular object here, the Iranian example that you see on the lower right is also on view in the Allure of the Near East exhibition. I had mentioned unguentaria. Here are some of the late Roman imperial vessels in our collection from about 30 to 50 CE, so the very early Roman Empire. The coloring of them is very beautiful. They often exhibit characteristics of blue and green, almost a turquoise hue that's put into them. They're in the shape of flasks, and they were manufactured from monochrome transparent glass using blowpipes. Alternatively, they were free or mold blown, and they became prevalent throughout the ancient Mediterranean. While some scholars view the unguentarium as a lacrimarium or a tear vial, of which I will show you the example soon, that was to be buried with the deceased, other archaeologists counter that, and they say they primarily serve utilitarian purposes, such as storing and dispensing liquid, as well as powdered substances. Here is one that we have down here, which displays a different pattern and design. And they share many similarities with these works that are in the Tuma collection, not on view in the exhibition, but they take on various shapes and forms. The Muslims inherit many of the artistic and decorative arts traditions of the ancient Roman Empire, and they adapt and reinterpret. Two others in our collection include this Roman imperial lacrimarium, which would have been used for placing tears, a practice common in the ancient world. They were also used to store perfumes, I should add. Again, the coloring on them is quite interesting. It's also known as a tear vial. In some regards, they share commonalities and a tradition that goes all the way back to ancient Egypt. To this example in our collection, which is made of alabaster, a really beautiful stone, an ointment jar that would have contained lotion or other kinds of liquid to be put on the body, to be used for perfuming, cleaning, and also hydrating one's skin, and or used for making oneself up. The example in our collection here is very similar to the alabaster example shown on the right here, which was on the art market previously. The photograph here doesn't quite do justice to this example, which is in storage, either from North Africa or the Eastern Mediterranean, because it really has this beautiful, almost phosphorescence to it when you look at it. And I hope to be able to put it on view in the future. It dates from the 2nd century CE. Now, changing gears a bit, I show you a pen box, a very important object in Islam, because calligraphy and writing is very important. We come up much later to a decorative object in the collection made under the Qajar dynasty in Iran, which is renowned for having refurbished and expanded Golestan Palace in Iran's capital, Tehran. The use of color on this box is very similar to how the color is applied in these beautiful tiles at Golestan Palace. I can't emphasize enough how important geometric, floral, and vegetal decorations, the creation of a setting of paradises in the arts of Islam. The lacquer box that we have in the collection shares a commonality with this one that's in the Huntington Museum of Art and that's on view in the Allure exhibition, dating from the 19th century. Here is also one that's not in the exhibition, but that is in the collection, the Tuma collection at the Huntington, and it's made of a lacquered paper mache. Both our example and the one at Huntington contain lively scenes of court life on the top and inside of the lids. Work like this example were typically commissioned by aristocrats for display in their homes. And here you can see how beautiful it is. It actually shows the Shah going off on a hunt, and then he's depicted here in battle on the other side. You can also see courtiers mounted on horseback who are running around the whole side and sides of the box. Here is our example in the collection, the inside of the lid. While various courtiers, likely an aristocratic couple, are shown seated in a garden pavilion of a palace on the cover's top, and I'll show you that in a moment. Men on horseback, like the example at Huntington, are portrayed hunting deer, game, and other wild animals on the inside. So it's sort of like a surprise. You take the lid of the box off, you turn it over, and you get to see these beautiful scenes of courtly life. Each of them it represents the pastimes of noble society in Qajar, Iran, in which vegetation, food, and mirth abound. These themes are accentuated by the intricate floral and vegetal patterns that adorn the entire work. Caskets like these two were made from a base of paper mache to which a thinly coated layer of fine plaster or gesso was applied to its surface. Thereafter, painters executed designs in miniature technique and subsequently applied a transparent lacquer or varnish to the whole piece that would serve to protect the paintings while enriching and softening their colors. It's during the Qajar dynasty that you start to see some influence from the West in terms of objects entering the Iranian market, if you will. The Qajar dynasty and its Shahs witnessed an era of political and social reform, modernization, and industrialization, shaped by different diplomatic encounters with European nations. And to some regards, our box in the collection, which is on view in the corridor, was influenced by Western techniques. Most notably, as you can see here, introduction of European portraiture techniques, more detail in the faces, perspective and recession in space, and also the volume of the figures. And you can see here on this inside of the lid, you have the hunting seats going around the entire band of the object. And then you have the eating and the drinking. Look at the fruit here that's served up on the plate. A woman is also making music and entertaining generally the entire courtly retinue. It's really a delightful object. And when I arrived here, I'd long wanted to do more research on it. And finally, we've had a chance to get it out on view. Thank you very much for joining me for this edition of the Curator's Den, and I hope you'll come back and enjoy a second edition next month when we will shift gears and look at several manuscript pages, as well as an series of Indian miniature paintings in the collection. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care for now and bye.